Contrary to the opinion of some people, there is more going on in America than Pride Month, aka the holy month of obligation, and one person has found something that he thinks we all ought to be talking about. So, what do you think? Is this going to stir some controversy or what? My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk. Last Wednesday, ESPN columnist and on air personality Stephen A. Smith took on a topic that very few people are willing to talk about. And he did it with such power and with such passion that it definitely is worth a conversation to have. So I want to give you a little bit of introduction to who he is, show you where I found the article, play the video clip, and then from there have some commentary about it. Now, if you don't know anything about Stephen A. Smith, he is a print and broadcast journalist. He's been around for quite some time now. He's made his bones and he's earned the right to say what he wants to say. Most of the commentary that he gives is related to sports, but in the past few years, he's branched out into the area of commenting about politics and society, which is perfectly fine. He's got the right to the First Amendment the same way as I do and the same way as you do. Do I agree with his take on everything? Well, of course not. But then again, he doesn't have to agree with me on everything either, and I'd rather doubt that he would. So that sets up who he is, but let me show you what it is that he said that has set tongues wagging. Take a look at this. In an article from PJ Media written by Gwendolyn Sims, headline, ESPN host Stephen A. Smith is fed up with silence about black-on-black gun crime. The outspoken host of ESPN's First Take and the Stephen A. Smith Show is fed up with black-on-black crime and the silence that surrounds it. This week, Smith said during his podcast that he had, quote, no choice but to talk about it. Lamenting the high number of shootings in Chicago over the long Memorial Day weekend, Smith had a question for the black community. Quote, when are we going to look at ourselves when it comes to black people being killed in the streets of America? Smith is right to be angry. Over the long holiday weekend, 53 Americans were indeed shot in Chicago alone. According to ABC 7 Chicago, the victims range in age from 2 to 77 years old, representing every part of the city, despite efforts made by politicians and community organizations. Now, that's the setup. The video clip runs about a minute 27. I am going to do my best to stay out of it because, frankly, Stephen A. Smith doesn't need any help when it comes to talking. As a matter of fact, I liken him to the modern Howard Cosell, or I should say the modern day Howard Cosell. So I'm going to play this in its entirety. Folks, take a listen to this.
When we going to look at ourselves when it comes to black people being killed in the streets of America? I don't even want to get into what happened in Chicago, but I have no choice. This past Memorial Day weekend from Friday to Monday, at least 53 people were shot, 11 fatally, according to police. If one black person was killed by the police, we'd raise holy hell, and in some cases, there'd be riots in the streets. Where's the due diligence when it comes to putting a spotlight on what we're doing to each other? Because this is pissing me off. 53 lives. 53 in one weekend. It's not the first time this has happened. It's been happening year after year after year. Chicago, St. Louis, Baltimore, the list goes on and on. Where's the noise at? Where's the protests? Where's mainstream media talking about that? When we going to look at ourselves?
I don't know about anybody else, but that is probably one of the most profound things that I've heard in a long time. And I got to give him props. I got to give props to Stephen A. Smith on this. As a white man in America, I could talk about this till the cows come home, and no one would listen to me. The fact that it's coming from Stephen A. Smith, personally, I think it's going to make a difference, and I really hope it does, because this is something that's been going on way too long. Now, he asked the question, why is there no noise about this? Well, Stephen's not the only person who's broached this subject. Let me show you something else. This is from a few years back. In an article from Breitbart, Ray Lewis tears into Black Lives Matter for ignoring black men killing black men. Now, if you don't know anything about Ray Lewis, he's a former NFL player for the Baltimore Ravens, now in the Hall of Fame. Former Baltimore Ravens linebacker Ray Lewis is excoriating the Black Lives Matter movement for its silence about the rising rates of black-on-black crime. The things that ran in the newspapers have disturbed me, the ESPN NFL analyst said in an emotional video posted on April 2nd. Quote, I'm trying to figure out if black lives really matter. Then in Chicago alone, the murder rate has soared 72% in 2016, 88% in the first 3 months of 2016 compared to last year. I'm trying to ask the question to an organization of black lives, if they really mattered, then why not riot now? Good question. So you sit there, you listen to these gentlemen, and they're speaking directly to their own community. How bad is it? Well, let me show you something. These are statistics from the FBI for year 2019. Take a look at this. According to the FBI 2019 Uniform Crime Report, African Americans accounted for 55.9% of all homicide offenders in 2019, with whites 41.1%. Now, here are the stats that are really telling. Among homicide victims in 2019, where the race was known, 54.7% were black or African American, 42.3% were white. The per capita offending rate for African Americans was roughly 8 times higher than that of whites, and their victim rates were similar. About half of homicide victims are known to be single offenders, single victim, and most of them were intraracial. In those where the perpetrators and the victims' races were known, 81% white victims were killed by whites, and 91% of black or African American victims were killed by blacks or African Americans. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a horrible statistic. Now, you probably sat out there sitting there listening to this wondering, oh, come on, Front Porch. I mean, what's causing all this? Well, let's go after some sacred cows, why don't we? Why don't we talk about the destruction of the African American family? Why don't we talk about the fact that in a lot of cases there are no fathers to young men who are growing up, and those young men without fathers are going on to commit really horrible crime? Why don't we talk about the lack of police in these neighborhoods, which is brought about, by the way, by Democrat politicians? I'll get to that in a minute. Why don't we talk about any number of different subjects related to this, all of them contributing to this problem? Now, do I think the solution to this is totally political? Absolutely not. There's no solution to a social problem that's totally resolved by a law or an ordinance or a citation or something along those lines. If this problem is going to be solved not only in the African American community, but in America in general, there's got to be societal change. There's got to be changes of the heart. But I will touch on one thing as it relates to the political. Stephen A. Smith talked about Chicago, St. Louis, Baltimore. Well, let me show you something that you ought to consider. This article's from Breitbart, written by the inestimable John Nolte. Take a look at this. Democrat Party's crime spike disproportionately killing black lives. The sudden rise in violent crime disproportionately hits blacks and Hispanic Americans, which is a surprise to no one who lives anywhere close to the real world. The statistics gathered in the City Journal piece are staggering, heartbreaking, and predictable. According to CDC data released last month, 2020 bore witness to the largest rate of increase in homicides recorded in modern history, a finding that tracks with FBI data. Murders rose 29% from 2019 to 2020, surpassing the previous record of 12.7% from 1967 to 1968. Unsurprisingly, the victims of the latest surge in violence were not equally distributed across racial groups. The rise in black homicide victims from 2019 to 2020 was almost twice as big as the rise in white victims, 28% versus 16%. A new Marshall Project analysis on last year's homicide wave in major American cities highlights the striking racial disparity. More than 85% of the increase in murders occurred in black and Hispanic neighborhoods, where homicide rates were already higher than that in white neighborhoods. In Chicago, for example, black neighborhoods saw a rise of 27 murders per 100,000 residents, whereas white neighborhoods saw a rise of only 2 per 100,000. So, what does that have to do with politics? Guess who runs Chicago? They haven't had a Republican mayor there since 1931. In Baltimore, they haven't had a Republican mayor since 1971. Now, I'm not saying there aren't good Democrats that might be able to get a handle on this problem, and I'm not saying there aren't good Republicans might not be able to get a handle on this problem. To me, this isn't a partisan issue, and I don't want people watching this video to think that it is. But it does strike me as slightly odd that in cities where one party has been running the government for decades and decades on end, that these problems not only still exist, but they have metastasized and have grown and spread out, and they're getting worse. Now, I said there's a lot of reasons that can be blamed for what's going on. A lot of them are societal. A lot of them are matters of the heart. But there is also a political component. And I will say one thing to the African American community, and I will address this specifically to the city of Chicago. In the Windy City, there are, I think, anywhere from 3 million people or more that live in Chicago. In the last mayoral election you had, only 500,000 of you voted, which means that several million people had a chance to make a difference. And not only did you elect a new mayor, you elected a new mayor that by all accounts is going to be worse than the one that you're getting rid of. So with all due respect, if you don't like what's going on in Chicago, for those of you in the African American community, go look in the mirror, because it's your fault, in part or in whole. Now don't get me wrong, I want to see this problem resolved. And as much as I can from where I am in the world, I'm willing to try to help in whatever ways I can. But on the other hand, Stephen A. Smith is absolutely right. The only people that are going to make a difference and turn this thing around are African Americans. And it's high time that the African American community look at itself and say, why, in God's name, are we killing each other? But that's what I've got to say about it. Tell me what you think. Do me a favor. When this video is finished, please leave a comment below. Also, if you're not a subscriber to this channel, please do so. Hit the bell for notifications, and please give me a thumbs up on the video. I could use all the help I can get as a one-man band trying to get a going little concern to be a going big concern. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative. I'll see you next time.